Hello, and welcome to KSB's Board Leadership Workshop. My name is Marcia Wiesman, and I am a leadership field specialist, starting my second year of doing this work at KSB. And today, Gary Sechrist and I are going to share some information with you. Gary is starting his 8th year working with boards of education. So I'm going to ask Gary, as we go through our workshop today, to share some expertise that he brings to the table with his many years of working with boards of education. So as you have attended previous trainings about your role as board members, you've had conversation about communication, how important good communication is to your functioning as a board. You've looked at the legal aspects of your role as board members. Today, we're going to really focus on the leadership aspects, that third column of board focus. So we're going to talk about the 5 aspects of your role, those related to students, personnel, facilities, the educational programming, and how all of those pieces are tied together through communication and culture. But we're going to start our work today looking at the 5 areas of the key work of the Board of Education. So those 5 areas are vision, accountability, policy, community leadership, and relationships. That key work of the board is what accounts for student achievement. So the first area is vision. So Gary, can you talk to us, what does this mean for a Board of Education, and what might it look like when they're doing this work?
Thank you, Marcia. I appreciate that. These are in no particular order, but vision seems to be a natural number one to consider. As you probably can imagine, you can read a book on each one of these, but we tried to encapsulate a definition for each of these that might give you a clear, concise idea of what we are visiting with you about. But vision simply means that you as a board set the vision for the school district. Do you have a clear vision with high expectations for quality, teaching, and learning? And have you as a board established clear and specific goals to move the districts forward?
So as board members, think about an example of work your board has done setting vision for your district, and how do you think that work that you have done on vision has impacted your district? This is a good time for you to pause your recording and spend a few minutes thinking and discussing these 2 points. Okay, so our second area of the key work of a Board of Education is accountability. So Gary, tell us, what does accountability mean to a Board of Education, and what might it look like?
Well, accountability simply means, are you willing to hear what your community believes about your district, which unfortunately may mean that you need to be receptive to new ideas and constructive criticism. Are you engaging your community in some of the decision-making process that will affect them and their students? For maybe giving you an example here that I shouldn't, but have you ever done a climate and a culture survey of your community, which would give you a great basis for making some of your decisions that may need to occur for the future of your district?
So for yourself and as members of a larger board, can you think of an example of your work in accountability, and how has that work impacted your district? This is a good time to pause the recording, reflect, and discuss with your fellow board members your example and the impact it has had on your district. Okay, so the key work of the board, the third aspect is policy. So Gary, what are we talking about when we're talking about policy, and what does it look like?
Well, board, if you've been able to comply with the key work of vision, which would then infer that you have goals, you need to think about your policies and how they will be able to allow you to transform your vision, which is part of the key works, into reality. So most of you will say that we think we're probably pretty good with policy, and I'd have no reason not to believe that. But I want you to think about policy as slightly different. Every time you raise your hand to vote either yay or nay, you are basically setting a policy. So are these policies creating a barrier for you to achieve your vision, or is it creating a straight path for you to get to the vision that you are envisioning for your district?
Okay, so take a moment to think of an example of your board's work in policy, and how has that work impacted your district? This is a good time to pause the recording and have that discussion. Okay, the fourth area that we want to talk about is community leadership. Gary, tell us what this means. What is community leadership and what does it look like?
Yeah, well, we did start with vision, even though I said none of these are more important than the other. Without a vision, it's going to be hard for you to achieve any sort of goals that you may have. So if only your Board of Education and your administrators believe in your vision, your chances for success are pretty slim. So building public support toward your vision is vital. And think about the times that you best build community leadership is when you may have a bond issue. You have public forums, you meet with a bunch of different folks throughout your community to build a vision on what that bond issue will entail. How might you do that to improve language arts scores? But community leadership is very, very important.
Okay, so can you think of an example of your board's community leadership and how that community leadership has impacted your district? This is a good time to pause the recording and have some discussion about that. Okay, so the last area that we want to discuss today is relationships. So Gary, what is the significance of board and superintendent relationships, and what does that look like when it's effective?
Absolutely, Marcia. Obviously, relationships are very, very important between the board and your patrons, your community, as it relates to all of these key work areas. But this really speaks about the relationship, the board-superintendent relationship. Does the board allow the superintendent the autonomy to make the decisions that are necessary on a day-to-day basis to reach your goals? So as a reminder, many of you have seen this, that you do share, the board and the superintendent share goals, but you have different roles within that on how to achieve them.
So think of an example of the work that you have done to make your relationship as board members more effective with your superintendent, and how has that work to build a really effective relationship impacted your district? This is a good time to pause the recording again and have that discussion. Okay, so as we pull all of this together, those 5 areas: vision, accountability, policy, community leadership, and relationships, all come together to influence student achievement. Now think about this as we move into the next aspect of board leadership. So as you think about those 5 areas, what 2 do you think your board has had the greatest positive impact? And then why do you think you were successful in those two areas? What about the work that you did caused you to be successful? And how could you build on that success to impact the other key areas where maybe you felt less effective? Okay, so we want to go back to these 5 areas that we talked about when we introduced this workshop today. And these are the 5 areas in which your work is done. So the first area we want to talk about is students. So Gary, as we move into this next slide and look at what this work entails, can you kind of summarize for us what this means? What question would you ask them?
So remember, these 5 areas that Marcia is going to be reviewing with you are the areas of which your board needs to focus their efforts. So obviously you would hope that your vision is centered around the work of these 5 focus areas. So the definitions are bulleted. Students are, we would like to think, a high priority within your district. So what do you as a board, and how do you focus on your students' work and what you can do to achieve your vision as it relates to your students? Marcia has provided a question that we would like you to pause and spend a little bit of time considering, and that question simply is, what do you value in your district as it relates to students? So once again, this is a great opportunity for you to pause and please consider that question.
Okay, so the second quadrant that we want to explore is educational programming.
Well, excuse me on the advancing of the slides, but as Marcia said, the educational program is the second of the 5 focus areas. As you can see, the bulleted items are your definition of this. And as you can well imagine, these 5 focus areas are definitely intertwined. The educational program affects your students. It's going to affect your personnel, your staff. So please read through those. And after you read through this definition, the question that we would like you to pause and consider at this time and have great discussion is, what do you value in your district as it relates to the educational program?
Okay, then the third quadrant we want to explore is the physical plant, the facilities and learning environment.
Most of us think of our physical plant as bricks and mortar, of which they obviously physically are. But if you would look at the definition, does your physical plant provide the opportunities for learning that your students and staff need to provide the education that you choose to have within your district? So please read those bulleted definitions of what may include the physical plant. And upon conclusion of that reading, please consider the following question. In your district, what do you value as it relates to the physical plant and or physical plants within your school district? So please pause at this time.
Okay, and then we want to talk about the last quadrant, which is our personnel.
Thank you, Marcia. As personnel seems to be very obvious, the individuals that you have hired to do the day-to-day operations of educating your children, and of course that is not only your certified staff, but your classified staff. So reading those bullets, and for example, raising the quality and reducing the variability, are you able to reduce the variability that everybody is providing a high quality education within each of your classrooms? Are you attending to the core business? And does your district set high expectations and do your staff deliver challenging instruction? So with that, we would hope that you would pause and you would have a great conversation upon personnel And the question would be, what do you value as it relates to your personnel in your school district?
Okay, so then we've talked about students, educational programming, facilities, and personnel. Then communications and culture tie those four aspects together. Gary, what's the question we want to ask about communication and culture?
Yeah, after you have an opportunity to read through these definitions, you can see the question similar. But although we do not have a culture written in that box, we do believe that communications and culture is extremely tied together. Without a great culture, it's going to be hard to communicate, and without communicating, you're not going to be able to develop the culture. So these are the glue that allow you to concentrate on the other four focus areas. So with that said, please consider pausing at this time and have a discussion as it relates to what you value as it relates to communications and culture within your school district.
So Gary, we've talked about the key work of the board, those 5 areas, and then we've talked about the 5 aspects or the focus of their work. Could you tell us how do we tie those 2 concepts together?
Thank you for leaving me with the difficult question, Dr. Weisman. The 5 focus areas, they remember students, educational program, your physical plant, personnel, and communications and culture. Those are the areas of which boards of education need to focus their efforts. The key work is how you do those things. So how can you focus on those 5 areas, yet stay within the key work of the board to achieve what you are ultimately wishing for your students, staff, and community? So although there's not a question written here, we would hope that at the conclusion of this video that you will consider having a discussion on how you provide the key work within your work, and then how you focus on these 5 areas to improve and set the vision for your school district. So, Dr. Weisman, it's all yours.
Well, we very much appreciate your time focusing on board leadership, and we wish you well and want to let you know that you can always reach out and contact us if you have additional questions.